Right, welcome everybody. This is our strategic planning meeting for the Board of County Commissioners. It is July 15th, 2024, and it is 9:02. Please let the record reflect that Commissioners French and Kearns are in the conference room. We are joined by Commissioner Jordan via Zoom, and Commissioners CUNY and Waldriff are traveling for Wasac. So we are going to lead off today with a presentation from George Dahl. He's going to talk to us about HCD consolidated plan.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So this is a briefing Aiden on our team put together regarding the consolidated plan. So this is the 5-year plan that we submit to HUD. We're just finishing our 5th and final year of the prior. And so as we're finishing the final year, working into the next. We've got a bunch of stakeholder engagement meetings, etc. planned for this. And so we just wanted to provide a general overview on the process and the why, and also encourage citizens, anyone that's watching the video, either now or recorded, to participate and engage these various processes for engagement that we have. So the first thing is that we create this every 5 years. And it really is an assisting mechanism to help us establish goals and priorities for our different funding requests for proposals that we put out to the community. The plan includes programs such as the Community Development Block Grant Program, CDBG, Home, which is our affordable housing program, and then the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. In total, between CDBG, Home, and ESG, we're looking at approximately $2.5 million annually of resources. And those are all allocated directly to the county through the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. So one of the areas of the plan is a needs assessment. So really we're looking at different demographic data that is provided by HUD, as well as local data, to really analyze and better understand what the needs are specific to our community, and then writing and strategizing around ways to address those needs. Next slide, Ron.
So before you go,
yeah,
that last slide. If you track the 2000, 2010, and 2020 census data nationally, and then for the state of Washington, you will find that the percentage of home ownership for communities of color have dropped every single cycle. And it's been conjectured that that's because of state policy around housing that is basically priced out of the market, communities of color and low income. I mean, there's, the bottom end of the scale for housing is several $100,000 down and stuff. So how does that information and data factor into what we're trying to do here? And is there any expectation that we can overcome the negative influence of state laws and state legislation?
Unlikely in this planning process. However, one of the things that we'll do is we get a national data set. It's a special tabulation that HUD prepares for these fund sources. And that gives us a baseline, but it doesn't give us a great look at the community in general when looking at the needs that you're talking about there. So that's where we really try and bring in and layer over a variety of different data sources, including our past investments. Looking at any of the changing demographics within the county. The planning department, Scott Chesney's team, they've been doing some different analytic work there as well. So we're really going to try and take a multi-layered process approach to this to make sure that we're addressing it to the best of our abilities. But as far as influencing, hopefully we're able to develop some best practices that can be used at a state level to be able to address some of those needs. But yeah.
So the national data will differ from state data dramatically because the state has adopted legislative priorities and legislative impacts that negatively influence the ability to acquire a home. And so the national data won't reflect how bad the state of Washington is. So just kind of caution, advise, expand the database so it's specific to Washington and not national, otherwise we're gonna be chasing the wrong challenges.
Yeah, and we'll be engaging with our community partners through the process as well. Our affordable housing developers, both nonprofit and for-profit. We'll be talking with them to get better ideas and perspective on those issues as well. Okay, Ron, next slide. So the market analysis really starts to get into the housing, taking a look at the number of units, cost of housing, the public assisted housing units. We'll be again taking a look at American Community Survey, a variety of other demographic information to make sure that what we're doing is best addressing those needs. The last bullet point there where we see hazard mitigation, an example of that is where we're looking at that Let's Safe grant opportunity through HUD. So looking at the data and then trying to resource around what that data is telling us. Next slide, Ron. So one of the challenges with the last plan is it fell into, I think most folks are familiar with this, the saying that when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And so you can see up on the screen, we've got 19 different priorities that we were trying to address in the last 5-year plan. Really difficult to track and allocate resources to that many different priorities. So one of the things we're really looking to do is drill down onto what the primary priorities are within our community. And you can see several of the priorities listed on the screen could be laddered together into one service-based priority, and then calling out specific populations that we're trying to serve within that. One thing that we definitely don't want to do is show to the community that our number one priority, whether intended or not, it sure looks like it on this, that our number one priority was administration for these resources. That's not a priority, that's our duty. So we'll be looking at things differently there. And you can see approximately what that 5-year total would look like with each funding source, CDBG at 8.6 million, home at 4.1, and then emergency solution grants at 730,000. We always project plus or minus 3% year over year, but those are just estimated totals that we're going into this plan with, looking at historic trends.
And all of this is really about multifamily housing, not single family.
This is all of the above. So that's where we've really got to drill into it's not enough to just say that affordable housing or home ownership is a priority. Affordable housing for who, for where, and for what populations. Those are the types of things that we're really hoping to extract out of our community engagement process.
Commissioner Jordan?
Were those 19 goals were they prioritized last time, or is it just kind of they're all equally important?
It wasn't very well spelled out, but I think they're just listed in numeric order by when they were put in, not necessarily that. I think that they were all listed as a priority. When you look at the written plan itself, it says they're all priority, and then you have the opportunity to be able to identify them as high, medium, or low. And all of these priorities were listed as high. So difficult to know exactly what they were thinking when they wrote the last plan, but we're going to be a little more strategic in how we do this next one.
Do you have kind of a recommendation or an idea as to how many goals we might make us have an effective plan, or kind of a appropriate prioritization for this time?
I certainly have an idea in my mind. I would like to have it closer to 5 or 6 total goals. But we're also going to allow the community to dictate some of that as we engage with them. We're looking for that feedback, and then if we can help consolidate what we hear back from the community into, maybe we hear 3 or 4 different goals, and maybe we can collapse those into one goal. with some additional detail called out in that. Those are the things that we'll be looking to do. Okay, next slide. And then within this 5-year plan, we have our annual action plan. So that's the thing that we bring to you all every year to say, this is how we intend to resource the funds that HUD has appropriated to Spokane County. We seek public comment and engagement through that process. We also develop our request for proposals that then is that stack of projects that we bring to you all as recommendations for funding. Next slide. And then we've got these citizen participation or stakeholder engagement, really following the example that the planning department set in going out into the community, hearing the feedback. So one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to be strategic about how we reach out and go into the quadrants of the county. So for the east, we're going to start out at Spokane Valley. So we're partnering with the city of Spokane Valley to host this first workshop. We'll follow that up with a meeting out in Fairfield to try and get all of our small towns out in lower or I guess South Spokane County to attend, so that we can get a more rural feedback into what we're planning to do. We're going to do some joint partnerships with the city of Spokane and Spokane Valley at different community events to see if we can get some additional stakeholder feedback. Then we'll be out in Deer Park to hear from the communities of North Spokane County, then out in Airway Heights, and then we're going to conclude out at the Hive with a joint kind of follow-up through all of our engagements with the city of Spokane to make sure that our plans are coordinating and collaborating as best as reasonably possible. Next slide, Rob. So I mentioned that we're working with the city of Spokane Valley. We're also working with Spokane Low Income Housing Consortium and members of the Continuum of Care Board. We want to make sure that we're threading in our homeless response into these planning efforts. That way we have the 5-year plan to end homelessness, and then we have our 5-year consolidated plan. We want to make sure that those two plans are weaved together to the best of their ability, so that we're resourcing all of these things and not looking at them in separate list of priorities and goals. Next slide, Rob. So here's kind of our project timeline that we have right now. So really starting this month with our meeting out in Spokane Valley, going through October is our engagement. So we'll be gathering data, analyzing it. We'll be presenting the findings from each of our workshops at the next workshop with kind of the accumulation of all of those data sources that we got at that final meeting out at the Hive. Then we'll go into building out a request for proposal, opening that process up, and then drafting the plan, submitting the plan. So we'll be coming back in March, April of next year with those documents in their final form, with any public comments that we've received to you all for your approval to submit to HUD. Next slide. I'll also add that we just this last week sent out an email to all of our stakeholders on our distribution list, inviting folks to come and attend the stakeholder meeting. So you all should be on that as well, and we encourage folks to forward those on to their communities. Any friends or associates that are in this line of work, we ask them to come participate, engage. Our rural efforts, I think, are going to be more robust than what we've seen in the past. So we ask for special attention in those rural communities for them to come out, engage. We really want to hear from those communities what their needs are, because we know that there's a difference between our urban, rural, and suburban communities. So we're really looking for that comprehensive feedback. So any questions?
Commissioner Jordan.
You talked about collaborating with the valley and with the city, some of those other entities. I know the city of Spokane has their $1,590, which is a fairly substantial bucket that could be put to good use for affordable housing in the city. I'm just curious with the valley and the city, if you are successful with collaboration, what would that look like in a concrete manner? What does success look like in your mind for working with those jurisdictions?
I think for me, it's recognizing all the different tools and resources that we have to be able to deploy funds based on those needs. I think in the past, because we've had so many different priorities and there've been a lot of restrictions around how the city of the Valley has been able to use funds in the past. I think that collaboration and that opening up of different possibilities and ways to serve the community will lead to some different outcomes and partnerships than what we've seen in the past. So I'm really grateful for, and I see Eric from the City of the Valley is online as well. I'm really grateful for their participation, willingness to engage with us. Because when I started here, there was not as good of collaboration or understanding of what these funds could be used for in their community.
Any other questions for George?
Just one quick one on the timeline, George. RFP will go into a new process, right? Will we then be on an annual cycle with these, kind of condensing all the various funding streams down into one RFP process after that point?
Yeah, and one of the things, yes, we will. So you'll see us once every 12 months as opposed to once every 6 months, like you have this year. So this is resetting the clock. One of the other things that may be related to that, Commissioner Jordan, is we'll be asking the community if there's an interest in going to a multi-year contracting process so that we spend less administrative time doing RFPs. So one thing that I would like to entertain with the community is what if we did 2-year grant funding cycles? That allows us to be more committed to projects, reduces our administrative burden as staff, and also for you all as commissioners having us come back regularly. So to be determined how the community responds to that. But those are some of the things we're looking at.
So just in terms of the next RFP, we will be opening that before this 5-year plan is done, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So I assume that they'll inform each other, but obviously the 5-year priorities will take time to develop. And so just hoping that we can ideally, you'd love to have your priorities before the RFP, right? So that you can kind of direct what we're looking for in terms of funding. But I understand it's a 5-year plan. It takes time to develop. And so hopefully we can just keep those two things talking to each other, those two processes.
We're going to give this process space. We have a timeline. We know where we need to be, but we baked in enough time that if we're hearing from the community that more time's needed, then we built that into our work plan. So we're not going to rush it if we're not there yet.
All right, well, thank you very much, George. Thanks. All right, next we are joined by Scott Chesney, our planning director. Comp Plan 2026 quarterly work session.
Good morning.
Good morning. You can take it away whenever you'd like.
Thank you. We were here 3 months ago, had a preview of what's going on. We've got a couple reminders partially for our audience, and then we wanted to simply take some time to talk about the process by which we're going to be looking at creating this new comprehensive plan. And that is going to be a different approach. The county is due for a different approach. Our plan dates to the 2001 original. And while it has been complimented in some circles, it is simply showing its age. It needs some help. You can see on this first slide, it's just what is the plan for our audience. And notably, again, the legislature and GMA, they recognize that the county is a regional government. And we've reinforced this many times as we have worked toward creating a better partnership with our communities. We have made it clear that there are responsibilities that fall to this body and this body alone. And that while participation and consensus seeking is where we're headed, failing to reach that on a timely fashion is going to push us to be making recommendations to the steering committee and ultimately back to you. And we've had that discussion with our steering committee. We've had that discussion with FutureWise and others. It's like the county board is ultimately responsible, ultimately accountable for these issues. And as we know painfully, when they are not done adequately, we are the ones that suffer through litigation. Next slide, please. This is our diagram again of all the complex pieces that go into comprehensive planning, from the blue state issues to implementation that comes out the other side, and the plan in between. Next slide, please. We got a couple of data points before we get into some of the other parts. This one you've seen once before, but it's really an important issue for the county. Put it this way, it lays out, tells a really good story. And that story is that there's a lot of development in the unincorporated county, both in the UGAs, but also in our rural areas. And what it also highlights, and this goes back to 2008, so well after the city and the county adopted their 2001 plans, and the cities being centers and corridors. So Commissioner French, this goes back to your era on the county too. But you can see there are no clusters of permits in the centers or corridors as we know them in the city of Spokane. There are clusters in areas of fast growth, the Latah Valley, Grand Prairie, Glen Rose area, certainly 5 Mile Prairie. And then there's emerging clusters. You can start to see this Kendall Yards, for example, just north of the river. But the single biggest challenge that we have is creating a downtown residential base, because it shows clearly here that this isn't one. And it's critically important for the overall health of the county that we have a healthy downtown. And that's why this is so important, because planning for where that growth is going to go is going to make us successful. Next slide, please. So,
Hey,
before you leave that, Scott,
Of course.
so from a historical perspective, the centers and corridors strategy was adopted because there was a great deal of anger toward downtown, and they wanted to move the development emphasis out of the downtown core, but they didn't want it in their backyard. And I think what the centers and corridors strategy ended up being is a master plan for not in my backyard. And when you looked at it, it ended up in nobody's backyard. And as Scott has indicated, none of the centers ever got developed, nowhere near what was envisioned. And when it went to the neighborhoods, every one of them said, yeah, great idea, but we met over there. And no one could find what over there was and stuff. So I guess my caution as we go through the process this time is the loudest voice is not always the strongest, and it's not always the most representative of where the rest of the community wants to go. And that's, I think, one of the lessons we learned in the Horizons process was, yeah, there was great attendance by the same people over and over and over again. So you weren't getting a cross section of opinion. You were just getting the same voices over and over and over again. So hopefully we'll be able to avoid that this time.
Commissioner Jordan?
just a clarification. So are the orange dots single family permits and the blue is multifamily? Is that what that's showing?
Yes, that's correct.
And what year was the centers and corridors finished or adopted? Does anybody know, just out of curiosity?
It was adopted in May 2nd of 2001.
Okay. What time of day? Like 5:01 p.m.?
No, it was about 7 o'clock that night.
Okay. Thank you.
You want to know who's in the audience?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
One, as you mentioned, Brent, the centers and corridors as a plan concept looked good on paper.
Yep.
But the ultimate development regulations were really not able to implement that. And that's one of the key things we're doing differently this year with the county plan is we are working on development regs in parallel with planning language, rather than creating the plan and then saying, okay, now let's create regs to do this. It's the iterative cycle of, if we don't want to see this pattern replicate itself, what kind of regulations do we need to show the market that this is feasible? And that's going to be a fairly unique approach. And as George pointed out just before, the outreach efforts are also very different this year. You have adopted a public participation program that is very aggressive. It is very outward focused. While it respects what we call our interested parties, it broadens that base significantly, both in the industry as well as the citizens in general. So there's lots going on, as most of you know. Next slide, please.
Chris, have a
Quick question.
Commissioner
Sorry.
Jordan?
Is this map, this is really interesting. Is it available in some format where you can kind of zoom in and look at it in more detail, or is this what we have right here?
It is. It's posted on our web. I will send you a link.
Great, thank you.
We have showed you this before, and you have adopted these numbers as our planning numbers going forward. And again, there's two important numbers. One is the red number in the 2046 population of 655,000. That is our OFM target number. We in planning believe that is a conservative number. This is based on fairly traditional demographic analyses that are births and deaths, migration patterns following generally historic trends, things like that. And yet what we're seeing nationally is, again, more movement that is being driven by political choice, being driven by climate choice, it's being driven by jobs, and the fact that you can, as we've noted, you can work in downtown Los Angeles and live in Spangle. And we have a chance to capture that because the quality of life here is so high and outstanding. So we think these are going to be very conservative numbers, and we have a chance to test them now, but also get in that first 5 years of the 20-year horizon. So the new schedule for GMA work is finally at a place that makes sense. And those of you that follow the markets recognize that you can generally predict fairly well where the development markets are going to be in a 3 to maybe 5 year horizon. But beyond that, there are so many intangibles, it's just a guess. As long as we're updating these every 5 years and have a chance to do that, that first 3 years is going to show us where we're going. And that second 2 years, that trend line is going to be fairly accurate. And so it's a good process. The other number, though, is in the delta or the change from 23 to 46, and it's the unincorporated inside urban growth area that shows 31,000 new residents. That number is the largest single population block expected in any of the jurisdictions, considerably larger than what's expected in the city of Spokane or Spokane Valley. So what that tells us, aside from the obvious, it means the county is going to be planning, administering, and maintaining urban areas well into the future, probably past our professional lifespans with the county, and it informs us of how we should be building those for quality of life. Now, the other part where we use this as a testing number for the city, for example, is can they really absorb 23,000 new residents within their boundary? And this presumes just within the existing municipal boundaries, so not any urban growth areas contiguous to the city of Spokane. Unlike 2016, the city has adopted a much more robust zoning scheme for single family and multifamily residential. So they've got better tools, regulatory tools that they had before. But
Commissioner French, as you pointed out before, if you take a South Hill block that was built in 1920 bungalows and scrape all 12 of them off of there and try to fill that with multifamily, the infrastructure in the street can't handle it. And then, and if you're a block off Monroe or something, and you can attach to a bigger interceptor, you may be able to make that pencil out, but almost anywhere else, that infrastructure upgrade is going to be prohibitively expensive to achieve those densities. So, and the city's aware of this. They know they're looking at that, and when they come back, they will be giving us what at least they believe is their honest assessment of what they can grow inside. As you might imagine, if you can't reach that 23,000 number, that population growth has to be allocated somewhere. So that'll be the second and probably third iterative round of this of these data, and that will inform and lead to the growth of the urban growth areas. Next slide, please.
So does this number, Spokane, the 23,357, does that assume that you're going to be able to develop in Latah Valley corridor, or does that take that out?
In this case, it does not yet assume any geography. This is just the math.
Just
of
straight
dividing
math.
up 100,000 new people.
Okay,
Kind of by the percentage of what share you are of the metro core now.
Okay.
In general. And in some cases, the growth trends showed negative growth for some of the smaller places, and the PTAC and steering committee for the most part just zeroed that out for now, because it doesn't make. It may be true that the trend had population leaving some of the small towns, but most of them would like to grow, and we would try to give them a path to do that.
Commissioner Jordan?
Just to make sure I'm following Scott, these are the population numbers that came from OFM, and the county was really given the 3 low, medium, and high options. And is this reflecting the medium projection that the steering committee recommended?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So the next path is how we start to get to the land side of this. And many of you have seen these 6 steps several times, but they're pretty straightforward. And it's vacant lands, available lands, taking out those that can't be developed, putting in a market factor. And then number 6 is the magic sauce, so to speak. It's bringing together that population number with the available land that is still there. This is where the rubber will hit the road, so to speak, and we'll be seeing some of this happening with the steering committee at their September meeting, and hopefully with a more detail by November. Next, please. What we also are looking at on the county basis is taking a kind of a finer grained look at underutilized land. And because right now that remaining part is looking like it's mostly a rounding error. It doesn't look like there is a substantial benefit of that within the current UGA boundaries. And then looking at kind of changing some of the partially used criteria based on densities rather than lot sizes and things like that. So all of that is to try to get a defensible look at what we have and what we have to build into, which leads us to the kind of basic conclusions on the following slide, which is what we have is about 2,200 acres of vacant land, about 1,300 of partially used land. The capacity of dwelling units for that, based again on historical trends, which is about 4.4 units an acre overall, is about 14,000 units, and splitting that between single family at 2.5 persons per household and multifamily at 1.5 persons per household, which are gross estimations to be sure, but they're generally accepted in the planning world, leaves for population capacity of about 30,000. And our projection for the UGAs is 3,772. So it's a pure coincidence at this point. But what this is saying is, if we look at all of the urban growth area that exists, we may be able to handle the population growth that's coming. What it doesn't say is where that urban growth area is going to be. This, and you can see it on the next slide. We've spoken with you before. There's a lot of acreage that was lassoed by urban growth boundaries in 1990 when the UGAs were created as part of the GMA. And forgive me, we do get lost in our acronyms all the time, but as the Growth Management Act was created, every place was given an urban growth area with, a best guess. It's like, we've never done this before. What do we think? And so that's how we got these fairly heavy acreages in some of the smaller towns. Now, since 2001, most of that is still undeveloped. And so the trend line for growth in these smaller areas is fairly small. But what it means is that those 1,600 acres, in some cases, are going to shrink dramatically. So that if Cheney, for example, we heard about last week, they want to grow, their urban growth area on their southeast is unsuitable for most growth, but they can grow north along the highway corridor or south corridor if they chose, but their direction is north. Their urban growth area will accommodate their requested growth that they can, I guess, defend. And defense is, it's one thing to look at the market and say, we want to grow by 1,000 people. But if another is, we've got landowner properties that are ready to plat at 200 units, then that's a fairly defensible number. So we're confident that in the Cheney case, that urban growth area will accommodate their growth plus that factor for 20 years. But in doing so, the areas that can't or won't grow in urban form are going to be either removed or reallocated to other places where they are suited for growth. So in one sense, there's two ways to look at this. One is we're going to draw a new urban growth area boundary from scratch in 26. It will not include rural areas, but it will include new urbanizing areas that can be supported by capital facilities that are well suited, have water, have other things. The other way of looking at it is we're going to reallocate this 1,670 acres and see if that suits our needs before we add more acreage itself to the boundary. While we are wonderfully close to coming back into compliance with GMA, we do have the settlement agreement as a contract yet out there that is not affected by our compliance or not. And so if we were to expand the UGA in acreage, we're going to have to be careful that we can defend it, because otherwise I believe we'll open ourselves back up to more litigation.
So as we go through this process, one of the criteria for the Growth Management Act was affordable housing, not just housing, but affordable housing. And as I look at some of the developments that are going on right now, and I'll take an example, Qualshan or Eagle Ridge, which is a prime neighborhood to live in, but it's on the hillside, and the developers are having to spend anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 more for the site just to be able to get a buildable site, retaining walls, excavation, a whole lot of other things have literally doubled the cost of a lot, and it's no longer affordable. And so while you can build in some of these areas, I don't know how you achieve the affordability factor and still not price out a significant part of your population from affordability and home ownership. And I know that there are legislators over at the state that, in fact, I've actually talked to a couple of them that said, we don't want people living in single family homes. We want them living in apartment buildings. When I challenged them on that, they said, it's easier for us to control one landlord than it is 300 property owners. And I thought, well, okay, now I understand the problem. But affordability has got to be able to become a factor here, because otherwise we're just continuing to ship people over to Kootenai County.
Right. I think it's a valid observation. George noted that his team and our team have been working really very closely together to understand the landscape of housing. the elements that GMA now requires through the climate bill and through the housing bill that are going to be income level allocations per community is going to be a challenge in many ways. And one is the simple, you can't have complicated land become affordable. So is the housing going to take on the need for not-for-profit partners? Is there going to be a different funding source that's away from market-driven financing? If so, will that come together organically, or will it be a regulatory system that is created by a tax of some kind? You know, we don't know where that's going, but clearly the legislature, I believe, as those of us that are doing planning under these new rules for housing allocations are starting to put together the constraints. It feels like the legislature, in their role of a state planning commission, will probably get their fingers back in the pie and stick something else in it this coming year. So, next slide, please.
Oh, Commissioner Jordan, do you have something?
Sorry.
Can I just back you up a tiny bit, Scott, on the total? You had the slide about the 2,200 vacant land acres and the 1,300 partially used in the UGAs. Can you just remind me, how was that calculated, and is it in the unincorporated UGA or everywhere in the UGA?
This represents only the unincorporated UGAs.
Okay.
But it is a consolidated or an aggregate total. So this 2,200 vacant acres includes, this is developable under current rights. So, you know,
Does that include rural then as well?
That's on the next allocation. So
All right.
that's why I said our calculus is, in one way, we're going to draw this from scratch to accommodate these 30,000 residents. And can we do that within the lands we have, including the rural lands? There's, you know, some of the reason that these lands exist is they're more challenging to build.
Yeah. They're more expensive. They're twice as expensive as regular lot. We're driving people out of the county.
So that 14,000 units is based on a, you know, kind of an accepted algorithm. But it could be that instead of that 14,000 being at the median home price of, you know, 400,000, that median home price might be 600, might be 550. And that's,
So help me understand that, Scott, because am I misunderstanding? I thought that you had, in reaching this number, kind of taken out some of those worst lots or worst unbuildable lands. These might be more difficult, even if they're not technically unbuildable. Is that what you're saying?
we have removed the lands that are unbuildable by our own regulatory standards. So critical areas, wetlands, steep slopes over 30%, things like that that are already in our regulatory toolbox. There remains challenging land. You know, the common saying is the easy places to develop in Spokane County are done. They're full. And you have to go to the more challenging lands. So these could be lands that have 15 or 20% slopes or borderline areas like that. They could be, you know, typical South Hill with you know, heavy basalt right under the surface. It's also more hard to deal with, hard to put infrastructure in. So there's a number of layers of parameters that go into what these numbers look like once they're turned into geography instead of math.
Okay.
Good.
And
Can I
just can I have one more question? Sorry. You mentioned being kind of cautious around the settlement agreement in these discussions. Can you just clarify how does the settlement agreement, what is the requirement in that we need to be mindful of as we're talking about where UGAs are and how they might change?
The settlement agreement has more than a handful of elements talking about the urban growth areas. One overarching one is that the county is prohibited from changing its urban growth area or expanding its urban growth area until 2033. But there's kind of like escape clauses in there. One says that does not preclude the county from adjusting its UGA when it does a major plan update, which we're doing now. There were also triggers on population growth. If the county went past 50% of its projected growth in a 10-year period or a 5-year period, it allowed for that adjustment of the UGA. So there's subtleties in there. All I'm saying is if we come close to hitting the total UGA acreage and it accommodates most of our growth, it's just one less thing for someone to put a target on our backs on. That said, Commissioner Jordan, we will be able to justify and defend what this urban growth area looks like. And if it requires an extra 1,000 acres, we will have a defense that is based on GMA compliance. So it's, maybe I'm being a little, overly cautious, but if we need to grow, we'll be able to defend it.
Thank you.
Scott, just so I'm clear, when we see vacant land, you have the 2243, and then you've got your partially used land. So is that meaning we've got essentially 900 free and clear open, or we've got a potential of actually 30, 35, 50 potential?
Second,
Okay,
those
okay.
are not subsets of the same.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And the partially used land in the simplest sense is a 1 acre parcel that has a single home on it. That is not more than 8 times the value of the land. And the implication is that it would be a candidate for carving that 1 acre up into lots and leaving the one person there and adding the other units.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that calculus.
Okay.
And then back in the methodology, there's also the market factor that says, okay, you've got all of these lands, take 30% out because it's unpredictable. It may not develop. You think you could put 5 more units on this, somebody may only want to put an ADU. So it provides a little more conservative cushion.
Or the person that owns it is like, no, I like having my house on 1 acre and I will never split this up. So, yeah. Okay.
So now we're going to move into more of the geography side. What's on the screen here is the Metro Core urban reserve areas that are highlighted, that light color. These are the lands that our predecessors in creating the 2001 and 2010 plans thought were the candidates for urban growth as the urban growth boundary fills up. And again, you can see off the Moran Prairie on the side, or south side of the city, wrapping around to the Latah Valley again. The Glen Rose area between the cities, the southeast, the Valley UGA, north of Liberty Lake, on the north side of the river, off of Otis Orchards. A big chunk kind of off the Argonne Road going up to Bigelow Gulch area in the center. And then 5 Mile Prairie and on our northwest side, with also then the unincorporated areas around what we call North Mead, up on Newport Highway and 395. And there are smaller versions of these around Medical Lake, Cheney, and some of the Deer Park. So these, in some ways, these form the first basis of a study area for urban growth adjustment. And then again, many more layers get put over the top of that. Can these be served with urban services? Can they be connected by transportation systems? And the Latah Valley and south of Moran Prairie, while those are big acreages of urban reserve, putting an east-west connection from Palouse Highway down to 195 is going to be a multi-billion-dollar project. So is it even feasible? Is it a North Spokane corridor scale project to go down there?
So can you address that? And I'll use the North Metro there in Mead. You've got different colors up there. You've got a yellow in there and a purple.
Yes. That's a remnant left over from pre-Growth Management Act days. Those areas were zoned in what was called business zoning for the most part in 1985. when the GMA was adopted, they were essentially grandfathered in. So the colors that you see represent the comprehensive plan designations, which are limited development area commercial, limited development area residential, and rural activity center. GMA calls those the LAMRs, the local areas of more intense rural development. So in that lead area especially, you have a comp plan LAMRed with contemporary urban zoning on the top of it. Your predecessors tried to reflect that in 2013 and include that in the urban growth area, and that was challenged by the Growth Management Hearings Board. We're not at the sense of beating your head on the table and seeing if it feels any better the second time, but we've been working with Commerce and FutureWise to say this doesn't make any sense to leave this out here by itself. And we have to right size this. We have to accommodate this. Yes, sir.
So from an historical perspective, I could share with you that while the land north of North Indian Trail there was shown as urban reserve, that was a concession, but the commitment from the city was that they would not expand the urban growth boundary any further to the north until they could get a second exit off of Indian Trail. And so there are still enough people up there that remember that would probably raise hell and go to battle on it. And so just kind of an FYI. The other thing is to get up onto the top of the hill there from Lake Top Valley, you got to go through Grandview Thorpe neighborhood and fight to the death and already have ammunition to make sure that that will stop, which is really frustrating for the city because the city would love to be able to, they've already got covenants and stuff up there in the West Plains to annex that into, but they got to get through Grandview Thorpe to get there. And there'll be a battle on that one to be paid. Then there was, and then over by Argonne and Bigelow Gulch, that area is right for development. Out of the Northwoods development, they just drop right over the hill. They got sewer and water, a lift station, and they're ready to go. So you might want to consider that.
It's certainly clear that when the 2001 plan was done, it was not quite the anticipation of Bigelow Gulch Road being in its current form.
Yeah.
However, since it is, there is equally no question that will put now development pressure all along that corridor.
Yep.
Because of the ease of access. FutureWise fought the county over leaving a tiny little bit of UGA around the intersection at Bigelow Gulch and Argonne on the southwest side. And they're still very concerned that we're going to use that use that as an excuse to grow up on the west side of Argonne Road, which some of this is close to being eligible. We're going to look at it with an open mind, but reflecting the fact that Bigelow Gulch Road itself is going to put enormous pressure on over the next 20 years. And of course, the other major area here at 5 Mile Prairie has, I'd say the vast majority of residents want no more development on that either, and yet it's all urban reserve. So as we rethink our growth and these new boundaries, we're going to look for a new kind of urban reserve that has a more realistic, say, 50-year horizon. And now that we know some of the things that we may not have known in 2001, and also the costs of some things to make that happen, I think this map will look somewhat different in 2026. Next round, please.
So I've got a question.
Yep,
Sorry.
go for it.
Just piggybacking off of Commissioner Kearns. So the yellow and the purple are the LAMRD up north. Is that what you said?
That's correct.
And then the areas with the black line, but with a slight yellow line diagonal, what are those?
Well, there's the one that's almost impossible to see on here are the rural activity centers, since they're a little bit further away from the metro core. But that purple crosshatch is the LDAC or commercial, and the yellow crosshatch is the LAMRD residential or LDAR. And the rest of the tan is simply urban reserve zone.
So the areas with might have been helpful to have a key on this because I'm just trying to understand it.
Sure. Oh, you're saying the ones with just the outline and the crosshatch?
Yeah, with the yellow cross lines that are spaced out, is that just a current UGA?
Yes, that's correct.
And then the slightly white areas you're saying are current urban reserve, or those are areas you want to study
Current. They're
current
that's
urban reserve? Okay.
current zoning map.
So those you're suggesting with those areas that they will be further studied for whether they're suitable for growth in this comp plan? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes, they were set up to be the next round of growth areas, so we will
Okay.
consider them in that context.
Okay.
But as Commissioner French and others have noted, there are some fairly significant constraints that may cause those to revert to some sort of more rural zoning in 26.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
We'll go kind of quickly over the next one, but this might be easier for Commissioner Jordan to see. These are the urban growth areas with existing zoning as they are today. So you can see a little more clearly the extent of what is listed and contained within that UGA boundary. So next slide, please. We're going forward with some, I would call them hypotheses. And there's, these 5 of them that we've put up on the screen as a starting point for discussion. And the first one is the idea of placemaking, and that's building neighborhoods, not subdivisions. Generally, that in our current zoning, our current development regs, you have a piece of land and you go through a comp plan amendment to get it in zone from something to low density residential or medium density residential. And then that's all you can do in there. The mixed use category we currently have provides very little direction. It's incredibly flexible, but it doesn't provide any direction on building that true mix of use. It simply allows for a lot of different things to go. And so one of the ideas, and we'll talk about in the next few slides, is what does that look like? That idea of placemaking, where you've got true mixed use areas that have, as you see the second bullet point, a better proximity of work to live, work and entertainment, living and amenities. And then, as we've noted a couple times, the landmarks are now ripe for a different kind of consideration. These were initial elements built to exist, but not to flourish. And now we're seeing that among other challenges with the Growth Management Act and reducing greenhouse gases, reducing vehicle miles traveled, if you can have your landmarks be a little more vibrant places, you will take some trips off the highway because you won't have to go into the city every time you want to buy something or every time you'd like to do something. And then finally, recognizing that we are not just building urban and suburban places, we have rural lands to protect. And that's a key element for us, both in resources, but also rural lifestyle. I mean, rural traditional that we've talked about, rural conservation, that idea of do you allow these wedding-based businesses to be a different set of incomes for those properties? Does those create senses of place? Or are they detrimental to that rural lifestyle? Next slide, please. Got a few kind of broad brush basics on how to go about looking at building places. And while this is a hard slide to see on the screen, it predicts sociability, uses and activities, comfort and image, access and linkages. And it's a way of just reflecting that these places need to think about things other than units per acre or minimum lot sizes. And if you've got a chance to do this, you can, I believe you can add value so that the development community will see the value in doing this. That said, we've done a little bit of kind of early due diligence with a small handful of developers, and it's kind of surprising results. They're There are developers that would fully embrace placemaking, and you can see it in Kendall Yards, for example. There are those that this is a new language, and in speaking with one of those that I thought was going to be not only a no, but a hell no. As we talked about a little bit, he ultimately said, so if we build in some amenities, we'll have this, you know, this zoning is going to allow this amenity factor to happen. We could even put jobs in the middle of a residential parcel. I go, yeah, that's a little oversimplified, but that's what we're talking about. He shook his head for a second. He goes, yeah, I think we can do that. I think we can do that. So I'm encouraged that I mean, we know this has worked in other places. You know, we're not making it up out of whole cloth. But if we create the regulatory system that allows for that to be built, at the very least, you're providing added value to the residential properties, because you might have you know, it could be as small as a subdivision with a C-store in the middle of it. It could be a slightly expanded version of the service station and the Hey Jay's Bistro in Liberty Lake, where you've got almost a destination restaurant tucked into a small little place. So there's a whole variety, variety of things. Next slide, please, Rob. And this is a little more abstract version of what that diagram means. And these are coming from kind of studies that have been done and projects that have been done both in the academic world, but also kind of real world, you know, mayors and others getting together and saying, how can we build better places? So we've got kind of three more slides on kind of the basics of this. Next one, Rob. The first is the idea of people-centered design, which is in one way obvious. If you want mixed uses that are vibrant, you want to be able to walk and bike and get somewhere without having to ride on a dangerous road or go too far. That makes biking unwise, perhaps. And we use this slide not because we think we're going to be able to build. This is the highlight.
Is that Chicago?
No, that's the highlight of New York.
New York. Oh, okay.
Running down the west side of Manhattan.
It was an old like train track, right?
Elevated rail.
Elevated rail, yeah.
This is in a community that allow condos though, right?
Yes,
They do.
and again, another layer.
Yes.
As we get back in compliance, we'll be able to have that conversation a little more credibly with our fellow peer counties and others. And I think there's another legislative solution that we can work. So anyway, this is one. Next, please. And this is more the idea of an actual mixed use idea. And it's just a simple sketch of showing different kinds of structures, different kinds of uses. Again, it's possible. It's not exclusive. And when you have the value of those higher density structures, it becomes easier for a project to pencil out creating that urban green space amenity in the center, because now that's not foregone land. It's not land. I could have put 12 more single family homes out here. I've captured the economics of this through the higher density development. Next, please. And these are just some ideas again of those the edges, putting trails in, putting green spaces in, recognizing that when you're building quality places, you have a landscape component to it. You know, tree canopies. I did have one developer come up to me after the planning commission meeting last week, as we were talking about these, and he goes, "So is the county going to pay for all the trees I have to put in?" I said, "No." And he guys poking me in the chest. And I go, "No, but we're going to work with you to show where it's going to show the value of doing this, where it's going to add value to the project." And so it's not something that's going to be a heavy-handed regulatory system. It's going to be, how can we make this pencil out? Just the same thing as always. And I realize these are new things, and that's why we're out here to study them. We're here to get your opinions.
So with something on the previous slide, with something like that, I guess in my mind, something like that would be ideal for 5 Mile. You know, where it's all single family residential, maybe a couple apartments, but no services whatsoever and stuff. But that would provide some services that would keep people from having to come down the hill.
it's one of the great ways of reducing vehicle miles traveled is to provide destinations outside of the core.
Yeah.
And in our world, we call that a polycentric model where you don't have simply a high density downtown core with ever decreasing densities go up, but you've got these places. And we certainly have it, generally speaking, because we've got, Airway Heights, Medical Lake, and all those. But we, the county, being in the UGA business, if we can turn some of those edge UGAs into more enclosed places, we'll take travel off, we'll have a higher quality of life. When those projects sell, they will retain their value better. So we see a lot of advantages to at least trying this and recognizing that our current development model doesn't really think this way. So we know we have a little bit of we have a story to tell, but also gathering data from those that we would be asking to put their capital at risk to build this, because it's not their usual model. Next, please. And this is just talking about, what do these models look like? You can see kind of a fairly high density, but a true mixed use project with a bell tower and a square in the middle of it. Again, it's just, the point of putting down ideas is to say, we're not talking in abstracts. It's like, here, it could look like this. And then lastly, one more. Commissioner Jordan, you brought up questions about this. Commissioner Kearns too. This is back to our Lambert on the meat area. Zoomed in a little bit. In here, we've got the foundations of what we're talking about. It has sort of organically built itself into a place in spite of being outside of the GMA world. Our predecessors in public works and through policy direction from this board's predecessors went ahead early on pre-GMA and started sewering most of this area as an aquifer protection tool. That's right now that's illegal under the Growth Management Act, and that's absurd. If this is already a place, we should recognize that we should celebrate it. We should enhance it so that it grows. And that would be, again, one of those elements that we would go back and say, this needs to be an exception from GMA for these reasons. But I put it out here because it's one of those, it's like, wow, here's a starting point. We've actually got one of these things that we don't have to build out of a wheat field. I think I saw or heard.
Yep, Commissioner Jordan.
No, thanks for the idea, Scott. I think there's some really interesting ideas here. So getting the creative juices flowing, specifically on the Lammert. Maybe I need to go back and do some more research on that as we go forward. But just sitting here today, does the fact that this area is a Lammert kind of restrict in any specific ways what your vision for it is? I understand that Lammerts were kind of historically defined, right? At a point in time, do they ever become something other than a Lammert? Just help me understand how that limits us, or maybe it doesn't in that particular area.
Chris, that is exactly the boundary or the envelope that we're going to push. This already is a place in real life. We need to recognize it, call it a place, no longer call it a Lammert. And it's a really good intro because as we talked about before, the plan is one thing, but you've got to have development regulations that make this work instead of keep separating things the way we've done for 200 years. And the idea of these mixes of uses of this placemaking philosophy, scenario building, that's where we will be able to put development regs onto the books that will encourage this to happen rather than force it into boxes that don't really make any sense in the current economy. But it will be an argument that we will be putting forward to Commerce and FutureWise. And as I said, the Department of Commerce is working with us very carefully on this particular project. We have their cooperation to call it a place, kind of remove it from the Lammert idea. They are seeing the value that we would create a UGA around this that would provide it still some guidance for growth, but also some limits that would be compatible with GMA. If organizations don't like what we're doing, but what we're doing is legal and under the GMA, I'm perfectly willing to stand up and say that we'll fight that and we'll do the right thing.
So just so I understand though, the county in its comprehensive plan can define where a Lammert is. Is that generally correct under GMA?
My presumption, Chris, is yes, because the county would have had to have created these in the beginning. So
Okay.
the zoning map is a creature of the Board of County Commissioners. And what we're talking about is changing the zoning type. So the idea is a Lammert may not even exist by that name anymore. They may become something totally different.
Right. No, that's good. I'm just trying to understand kind of the legal, what are our what is our limits, if there are any, to be able to maneuver in this area. But that's something that Jessica Pilgrim can help with too.
Jessica will be deeply involved in this, and as you know, I also want to be clear, we're not going off on a limb by ourselves and doing something that is GMA risky that gets ourselves back in the target of future litigation. The county's been there for too long. I know what happens when you go too far out on that limb. We want to do this the right way, but we also have an obligation to change the way we do business for development in Spokane County if we want it to be vibrant for another 20 and 50 years. It's hard to do that unless you provide opportunities for investment that are viable and long-term in their nature. So it's the regulatory system we have is just way too dated. It's dated all the way back to 1913 zoning in New York.
Well, and the other thing is that a lot of the development that happened along this corridor predates GMA.
Right.
And so it was already there. And the challenge that we had in the settlement agreement process was the state wanted to continue to ignore the fact that it was already there and say you can't develop this area. And we're going, it's already developed. Let's just recognize it and plan around it. But, you know, that was one of the obstacles we had in the settlement agreement process was fact and fiction, getting the two of them to align.
And like I said, we're approaching this from a partnership perspective on this trip. We've asked and worked with Commerce from the very beginning. It's like, yeah, we know we tried this before. It wasn't well received. Maybe now's the time to do it with the new ideas again. If you want to have a climate and resilience component, you need to build up areas like this to be resilient and to be sustainable. So we just think it's a good time to open that door again. Last slide, please, Ron. And this is roughly our timeline on where we are. You saw sort of that tentative land capacity analysis here at a very, very 50,000 foot level. We'll be showcasing some of that at the July steering committee meeting next week. I'm sorry, this week. Day after tomorrow. Getting some direction going forward, and then looking at this visioning and scenario development to help guide where these growth allocations are going. Then the idea that by the fourth quarter, the steering committee's November meeting, to have some idea of that first round of balance between the growth area by population, the math side, and the available lands and where we want to and can grow on the geography side. I think we're going to push PTAC and the steering committee to have that draft ready for discussion by the end of the year. And then you can see our bottom line, June 30th, 2026 in the hearing room. So with that, I'm still welcome any questions and thoughts. We put this together not just as a show and tell presentation, but to really get your ideas, because it is a new direction. As we go, there will be supporters, there will be detractors. and we want to be able to represent your direction on policy.
Well, I'll just say, weigh in. I think affordability has got to be, part of the equation and stuff, because doing it because we can, but it prices out a significant part of our population in terms of being able to be in home ownership. That's just, that's not a good strategy. It's not it's not an equitable strategy. We've got to be able to provide housing in a cross section of cost and affordability ranges so that we can get people into home ownership and at an apartment. So everybody's going to pay a mortgage. It's just whether you're going to pay your landlord's mortgage or your own. And we got too many people that are paying the landlord's mortgage. And from my standpoint, I just want to do everything you can to fix that.
Commissioner Jordan?
I just wanted to raise a question along those lines. I know my question is there anything more that we as a county think could be done at a state level, not necessarily within strictly the context of the comp plan, but to continue pushing, particularly on the condo piece? Commissioner French mentioned, much more, much less restrictive rules in other places. And it seems to me that there's been a good movement over the past couple of years in the state to loosen that up. There's been several rounds of bills, and I would imagine and have spoken to some developers that will take time, right, to try to find projects and test out concepts. But it still seems to me that we're thinking too small when it comes to those types of just making housing legal, right? And I agree with Commissioner French that I'm really interested in continuing to advocate for that type of housing, because it seems to be one where it's dense, and so it's got some advantages that in terms of affordability, potentially in terms of the climate piece, but it also has the home ownership piece, where you aren't paying someone else's mortgage, you're owning your housing unit. So I just wonder, is there more that we can push on before 2026 that might help? Can we look at some other models where other states are doing better than Washington State when it comes to condos? I just don't know what those states are. I'm not an expert on it, but I just feel like that could be an opportunity before we get to 2026 to continue pushing for progress on some of those statewide restrictions.
Mr. French?
So I'm glad you're sitting down, Chris, because it's one of those areas where I think we agree that, when you listen to Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck, and he tells you that we are the worst state in the union for condo development, that's saying something. And the challenge is that the legislature is only allowed up to 12 units, but you can build a 300-unit apartment building, and that's just fine. And the difference between 12 units and 300 is HOA dues. It's the management cost. It's all of those other associated costs that still make that kind of housing more expensive than it needs to be. And so you fix that by not limiting it by an arbitrary number of 12. But, if you can build 300 apartment units, build 300 condos. I mean, what is the difference other than you're paying your mortgage as opposed to paying your landlord's mortgage? And that's the challenge that I have with the legislation they've adopted so far. Is it still discriminatory? And there's no reason for it. I mean, there's just absolutely no reason. Let's help people out. So anyway, that's what we can continue to push on, and that's what I'm all invested in.
Well, maybe that's a topic that we could look at doing a specific strategic planning to just further discuss, and could be something that we look at as like a top priority next session, just because I feel like, we're going to hit a point where we're at that 2026 deadline and we'll have that plan. And if there's regulations that we could change now or in the short term that set us up well to take full advantage of that, I think it is something we could all get behind and we could make a big push, recognizing there's been lots of pushing that's been already done and it has been positive. But I agree, Commissioner French, we might be able to go further. And I do think Spokane County can be influential statewide on things that we agree on like that. So let's keep working on that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that one of our champions in that effort was Senator Padden, and he's now not going to be there. So we not only have a vision, but we need to find a new champion as well. So
Right.
yeah, no, I'm all in.
All right, let's work on it.
You would be a breath of fresh air in either of the majority caucuses over there, Commissioner Jordan.
No comment. No comment.
But no, I think you're right. I mean, progress has been made, but it's been very, very slow. I mean, it's just been these tiny bites at the apple, and eventually we got to eat the whole apple and actually get something that's going to make a big difference, because time is working against us. So, all right. Well, anything else?
I guess maybe just a quick follow-up on that.
Yeah, go for it.
We have been talking broad issues with our other regional planning directors through WASAC. So we are participating in kind of broadening our horizons with the intention of bringing ourselves into the game so that perhaps we can get our peer counties, the 5 or 6 big counties together and put together something that maybe does cross party lines, but fits economic development patterns all the way around. So yeah, on the planning side, we're working through WASAC to hold those conversations too. And we'll continue that and be able to, I made a note, we'll be ready to bring something back at our next quarterly session.
All right.
Other than that, we are, you all know where we are. If you have thoughts and questions.
Sounds good.
I'm sorry we didn't have the other 2 commissioners, but we will be around next time.
It's their loss.
Just one quick one. Sorry, just in terms of next steps. I see on your timeline, it says July 2024 tentative land capacity analysis consideration. So what is that, just to clarify?
In the broadest sense, it was the slide that showed the available land, the number of homes and the number of population, the 30,000 and 30,700. It's breaking that down to the first layer of what does that look like on the ground. The city of Spokane has been working pretty diligently on that. We think they're going to have something to show later this week, or at least talk about. The other communities are, for the most part, we're waiting until July 1st where they can start using their commerce grant dollars. But that being said, the biggest impacts are going to come from the bigger players, and so we can push the macro scale forward, I think, here in July and August.
So we started the consideration, but more to come on that in the steering committee and other settings.
Yes, we think all the way through November meeting of the steering committee.
Thank you.
And Scott, on the early maps that had the urban reserve, I mean, so we can't put all of those in the UGA, are we? Correct? Like that would put us way beyond the amount. So how do we decide which ones to do? I mean, I guess I guess on the timeline, at what point do we make that decision? You know, from now till 2026, at what point do we sort of, I mean, do we decide entire urban reserve chunk? None of that's coming in, or do we say half of that chunk of urban reserve is in, you know, a quarter of this one, you know, 3/4 of all of that? I mean, at what point does that happen in the process?
It is our intention to push the steering committee to have that first kind of draft map by the end of the year, by November.
Okay.
And so they'll get sort of the update here this week. Then they've got their September meeting to look at perhaps what's the first draft of that really look like, and then November to maybe refine that.
Okay.
In my opinion, if the steering committee goes past January in saying now we have an urban growth area for 26, that's gonna slow us down to finish the rest of it, because once, we need to have some certainty of where those areas are to start doing this whole exercise in placemaking. It's like, well, if we're gonna grow here, how do we get there? How do we plan for that now in the next, less than a year?
And just, I'm just gonna throw out a hypothetical or an example. You both, Commissioner French, you both talked about Bigelow Gulch. Something that wasn't there. I mean, we've got a section of urban reserve here that's near it on Argonne. We do have the ability to say, well, actually, more development can happen sort of in that area, even if it wasn't in urban reserve, correct? Like we can expand out and look at other areas that aren't. So we're not just, I mean, so everybody, our tens and tens of viewers are just so they have, I mean, we're not limited to just what was urban reserve.
No, not at all.
So, okay.
There is no legal connection. It was a planning observation by our predecessors 20 years ago
Yeah.
that this is the next logical area to think about.
And if something is urban reserve, there's the possibility that none of that ends up in the UGA as well.
Yes, there is that possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
The urban reserve classification was created to try to maintain those lands in bigger parcels,
Mhm.
20-acre parcels or bigger. So that if they became growth patterns in the future, the land could be developed. You've got sufficient size lands to do it. When you get to what used to be the R5 and the rural traditional that's out beyond those edges, they're down into 5-acre parcels all over the place. And those are the ones that are very hard to consider being redeveloped because somebody's put $1 million house on a 5-acre parcel. They're not interested in subdividing the rest of it.
So the one thing that I noticed didn't appear on these maps, but I know is top of mind for you, is the growth pressures for Airway Heights, Medical Lake, and Cheney. You did mention Cheney a little bit about the topography and wetlands and all that kind of stuff, but I know that Medical Lake has a strong desire to start moving toward Greg Road. I know Airway Heights, Airway Heights is a whole nother animal in terms of how and where they develop and stuff, and some of the constraints they've got around them and stuff. So I'm assuming that those will also be.
They're priorities for us. We have to be good partners for both of those.
Yeah.
With Mayor Cooper and Medical Lake, we met early on. How can we help you do this? Their current UGA boundaries are both north and southwest. Make no sense for development whatsoever. The north one, of course, is also under the J-Luz contours. And so, yes, we want to create a growth area for them that moves them to the east. And so, will it be that same exact acreage? Unlikely, but it will be sufficient for them to grow in a 10, 20 year horizon.
Right. Yeah.
Airway Heights, we have to do the same thing. Airway Heights is a challenge with lots of complexity.
Right.
If they could grow up, if they could grow a more dense downtown, they would benefit them, but it's really not the style that's been out there. They're cut off to the east by mining. They're now cut off to the north by mining and minerals for the most part. They're cut off to the west by tribal lands, and they're cut off to the south by jailers. So there's going to be a big challenge in helping them go, but we're going to look at every opportunity we can.
Does that then create need to maybe take another look at J-Luz? Don't answer.
I think, well, everything should be considered and evolve over time. My experience in other places, though, is if you open that door a crack, it'd be like the federal government holding a constitutional convention. What's really going to happen?
Yep.
And the other option is if the Air Force were to request it, it would help them.
Commissioner Jordan?
I don't mean to open up a new rabbit hole, but the discussion of state policy reminded me just a question. I can get a briefing later as well, but do some of the bills that have passed in the last couple of years relating to allowing townhouses and duplexes in more single family zones, lot splitting, et cetera. Do those touch the unincorporated UGA, and does that factor into anything you presented today, like the dwelling unit capacity and the vacant land, anything like that? Or will that come into play more when you're looking at the housing element specifically?
For the most part, the legislation recently passed has been confined to cities. The counties have been cut out.
Okay.
And so that would include the unincorporated UGAs. What we're suggesting in the broadest sense is we replace that kind of zoning with this placemaking strategy that would allow for those higher density units to be in there in a by right strategy. So you could simply do that as part of an overall development plan.
Okay, thank you.
But it does create an irony though, Commissioner Jordan, in that, and they've allowed it in an area that's most constrained because of capital infrastructure, capital facilities, sewer and water predominantly. And in areas where it would be most likely to occur, they didn't allow it. And so it's, well-intentioned, but won't achieve much of an outcome because it's constrained by other elements that the legislature didn't appreciate.
Commissioner Burns, speaking of the Bigelow Gulch area, couple of things just to wrap up. One, quite a lot of the land in that urban reserve zone right there is Spokane County owned. It's publicly owned. So there's that challenge, which doesn't mean that that couldn't be declared surplus and put on for development at some point. The other sort of sidebar is we are meeting with the Orchard Prairie School Board tonight to answer their questions about what's going on in the area.
Okay,
Thank you, commissioners.
thank you. All right, Pat Bell, come on down.
Pat Bell, Martha Lou, the Billiter. So I think we have a full packed agenda tomorrow. Is it okay to just mention a few communication items in addition to the events protocol?
Sure.
So Martha Lou had sent out the assessor's new tool, which allows taxpayers to see how a levy proposal would impact their taxes. And so that's now available on the county website for anyone that wants to include it in their newsletter or other communication materials. I think there's one levy lid lift on the website already for Airway Heights, so taxpayers there can see how that would affect them. Martha Lou also updated on Friday the burn ban restrictions on the county website. We know those have been of interest to folks, so we're getting that message out. We also have an interview request for Justin based on a NACO award that his department received, and so that should be generating a story. And one thing I'd mentioned to the board is I am recommending a press release for tomorrow's vote on the juvenile justice sales and use tax. Juvenile detention facilities, as Jim Macia would want me to say. But we will have a communications draft plan and a fact sheet draft, hopefully ready for consideration this week to go along with that. Assuming the board approves it, moves it forward on the ballot. But there's been a significant amount of interest from the media on those items. I know a number of you have talked to the media or had interviews, so thanks for keeping us in the loop. And any questions on any of that? Were there head nods good with the press release for tomorrow?
I'm good with that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So we'll coordinate with Chair CUNY on getting a quote in there. In terms of events, I'll turn it over to Martha Lou. I just mentioned we're shaping up to have a very busy fall on the events front. There's only a couple we'll highlight today. We're still locking down dates, times, and locations. But in addition to our other protocol documents, this is designed to help us work most effectively with you all and your assistance to bring the board the kind of events that you desire, but also successful events that help drive awareness of all the county's good work. Many of these projects, as we know, are located in the commissioner's district, but they're board priority projects. And so that's what drives a lot of the protocol I just mentioned at the outset. And it's contained here. Oftentimes who pays for an event can come up, and I just remind the board, my department doesn't have a specific line item or budget for producing events. We do rent most of the equipment for events because it's a quick one-time use. It's also quite a chore to set up the big tents and the chairs and the stages and the microphones and all that stuff. So the infrastructure is almost always contracted out. Many of the departments have maybe some chairs or a podium, but rather than try and beg, borrow, and steal, we contract a lot of those services out. So there is a cost to the department when they bear the cost of these events. But many of them, we will scope it out with them at the very beginning. I'm stealing some of your thunder. But we let them know right off the bat, there's gonna be costs involved, and so they will try and build that into their project budgets. Knowing that this community engagement piece is bringing stakeholders and funders and community members together is an important opportunity to communicate what we're providing to the community. So, Martha Will?
Okay. So I hope you had a chance to look over the draft of the events protocol. As Pat was saying, we need to make it very clear to the departments that communications doesn't have the budget for this. So they need to accommodate that. And we've been able to work with them on a number of events this year. So that's been a good change. All right, so what we have coming up, it's going to be a very, very busy fall for the comms office. For example, Liberty Lake Park and Zephyr Road, there's going to be a ribbon cutting for that. The sheriff's car track, a ribbon cutting for that. Also Camas Meadow Park, we're going to have a groundbreaking, I'm assuming, Commissioner. And yeah, I kind of figured. And then a ribbon cutting when that is finished, but the groundbreaking is going to kick it off. And as you know, it's significant because it's first park on the West Plains. Also, in and amongst all of this, we have the state of the county that takes a lot of time for Jessica and for Patrick. And the big hummer on the horizon is the Bigelow Forker Urban Connector. And I keep pestering the
We're
project.
20 years in the making.
And that is going to be, there will be a lot of moving pieces, a huge guest list, community involvement. So that's going to be probably the biggest event that we have, is to be able to say that is finished. Now I keep pestering the project manager because he's telling me, well, you know, we're not gonna let traffic on there until November 8th. And it's like, come on, can't you do it a little sooner than that? So I'm trying to get him to commit to a date in late October, and it might be like October 30th, but I can't swear to that. But that's what I'm shooting for. So just to give you and Ron a heads up.
Okay.
But it's going to be a huge fall with all of these things going on, along with state of the county. So.
Just tell him we know he hasn't had to deal with snow or ice or even smoke. Like, this has been great weather. So,
That's what people would pay for some snow right now.
Well, he did show me some photos from the various construction phases, and he goes, see that photo? Yeah. Know what that is? It's construction. No, Martha, it's snowing while we're doing construction. And when was that taken? That was last November. Well, then let's do it in October. So.
Yeah, but wouldn't you hate to shovel snow in this kind of heat?
So looking at the document, it's 3 easy steps. Of course, this is condensing together a much larger planning document checklist that we go over with the departments. But how are events generated? They come from this board with a suggestion or a recommendation from us that something may merit a ribbon cutting or a ground breaking or something else. This is a little bit outside of the press conference protocol, but of course we know that we invite media to these events and there are opportunities for interviews. So again, a core communications function. These are activation events. They're a way to get the community interested. We do collaborate with the departments, And that's something that we've been working on. We try and coordinate as much as possible, a lot of upfront scoping. An important factor for us and for you all to consider going forward is just what your expectations are. How big you would like the event, how small you'd like the event. Of course, a smaller event, less cost, bigger event, more people, more chairs, more program, you know, more involved, that kind of thing. The desired outcome of the event, you know we can run a really mean process, but really, what are your expectations for outcomes? The department point of contact, we always like to have a lead in the department, somebody who can get decisions made and decisions made quickly. And we've been able to trim the sales back on a few events. When the department let us know, you know, we needed kind of rescope, but we're trying to do that upfront and not the day before. The guest list, we do handle and distribute and are able to design an invitation with the save the date. We have kind of multi-step contact. So we'll send a save the date, we'll send a please RSVP, and then we'll send an event reminder. So that is an email to that list, and then any other add-ons. And we can usually accommodate a few late add-ons, but we prefer to have that list developed in advance. Of course, we take the lead on the run of show, speakers and participants, but again, that's in collaboration with you all, your assistants, who would you like to have in the program? And we've had a few programs that have gotten very long. I think of like the North-South Corridor wasn't our event, but you know, there might be 12 speakers because it's a significant project. But it is good to have 3 to 5 speakers. Any more than that, you know, you tend to lose your audience a little bit. We also create a calendar and a timeline for the department and with the department of when we need things done by and on what time frame. So Martha Lou is the main POC for the communications office on events, but I'm the second backup. Jessica's able to jump in as well. And so that does mean a significant use of her bandwidth at the time. She is chiefly responsible then to keep you in touch with all the updates, how things are going, how many RSVPs we have, how's the event coming along, answer and address any concerns you might have. We do provide advance notice of the event to the speakers, guests, and meeting, and coordinate all that. That run of show is kind of the, you know, the agenda for the event, and checking and cross-checking to make sure people have their speaking points, they know what they're talking about, they know where to sit on stage, that kind of thing. And then very importantly, Martha Lou coordinates with the vendors. And there may be 2 or 3 vendors involved in an event. By the time you get the sound and audio event, the event rents, the seats, the chairs, and then getting permission from the project site to access the site and then to strike the event and clear. Something we don't have in here yet is, or could include, is oftentimes people will want food or maybe some cookies or something, or like a celebratory item, like a piece of the ribbon, the scissors, all that stuff. So those details we haven't included here, but that kind of flourishing touch is always something we can look to. But just wanted to reiterate again, we don't have a food light item in our budget, but Martha Lou has done a fabulous job getting patriotic flowers or cookies donated, that kind of thing. We have bought cookies and coffee before and just been reimbursed for that.
Nice. There's certain things you rent. I know we have that plexiglass podium. That's ours, correct?
No,
Oh, we rent that.
yeah,
Oh, it's been at so many events. I figured that was one that we owned. Okay. Is it worth purchasing some of these things so you don't have to rent them, like a podium, a microphone that maybe is connected to a large speaker on wheels, something you can charge up before the event, runs on a battery? I mean, maybe
or a
like,
generator.
well, generators tend to be loud. But
We
or-
had to deal with that. too.
or a collapsible stage, you know, maybe that fits maybe 1 or 2 people, you know, not a huge one, but something that can kind of fold up and be, I mean, would there be I mean, because I don't know how much these cost to rent, but I mean, if we're renting them 5, 6, 10 times, I mean, eventually they're gonna pay for themselves if we just purchase some of it. Is some of this worth buying, do you think?
Well, let
I mean,
me.
money's tight, but we can
take
find,
that
I think we
under
can find it.
Consideration, Commissioner. The issue is storage
Okay,
and then labor. Because I can't lift all these things on my own.
Pat's a big dude.
Well,
So-
I mean, the other consideration is if you come to like the event out at the bridge, two big box trucks delivering the level of equipment we're talking about, but a few of these
Yeah,
smaller
I mean,
items, I
we-
think could be good
yeah.
for like a town hall. You know, we've looked into that, it's like $150 for a nice size speaker with a microphone. That could be part of an events in a box toolkit. The
Like,
stages,
we're always gonna have to probably rent the chairs,
Yes.
the tents. I mean, we don't wanna own that kind of stuff. Those are huge. Those are difficult to transport, but like a collapsible stage that can fit in a pickup truck, a speaker with an attached microphone, and I mean, maybe the podium.
Yeah.
You know, cause the podium is something we can use around here too. I mean, if we're having an event here, I know we used to have a wooden
We
one.
used
I
to
don't know
have
where
one
that
in
went.
here.
that's in the collaboration
Yeah.
center.
Oh, did it get moved over? Okay, I was gonna say, I haven't seen that in quite a
It's-
while.
It's beautiful. It's built
It's
like a
heavy.
tank,
Yeah,
but it's not portable.
yeah.
I mean, it can be wheeled,
That
but not
plexiglass
rotated.
one that's at a lot of the ribbon cutting.
Yeah, that's just a
it
clear
looks
plastic.
light. It looks like it's lightweight.
Yeah.
And if we could keep it in here or somewhere else or work with Scott to identify or Gil some storage, we have a little bit of space in the budget office. They have a little bit of space down there. But even Jessica's space, if you ever come up to the fourth floor, she's got camera gear that we purchased. We've got the crow's nest. It's pretty tight.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think some of these lighter weight, more flexible things, as long as we're not talking tables, chairs and tents, we could accommodate. And we'll get together on a price list and cost
Yeah,
it out.
we can do that. Okay. Oh, and if you had questions about Bear Lake and the ops building, those will be next year. The ribbon cutting, for example, for Bear Lake will kick off the season. So it'll be right before. the
Okay, yeah,
start of the
I wasn't
season.
sure how we were gonna do that. Were we gonna do a ribbon cutting at the end of construction? Because the park's not technically open,
Exactly.
but the work will be done. So yeah, okay, I wasn't sure what the
So
timeline was.
I talked that over with Doug and I said, you know, honest to goodness, we could celebrate the conclusion of construction, but we're not inviting anybody in.
Yeah.
So let's do that in the spring when people can come in and we can use it as a promotional tool, that event.
Any other questions?
One question. What drove the need to develop a protocol?
These protocols are helpful because what tends to happen is we get questions, kind of one-offs from staff. And there's not good awareness of who's responsible for what. So something we're still working on with all of the assistants in particular is roles and responsibilities. What is the communications office role? And a lot of times, I'll just say, you know, I think your assistants are trying to be helpful, but it looks like giving us direction. And it's not always our responsibility to initiate something. And so we just want to really clear with the board for your expectations for us so that we meet expectations and not to ever feel like, oh, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. So having a very clear defined role and responsibilities, because the other thing is like Martha Loon, for instance, the invite list, you all have those contacts. We could go research contacts. If you don't have them, we can find them. But even just clarifying who's responsible for providing us the list. I think also the departments have had this question about who pays, and there's an expectation from the departments that we were paying, and we've worked that out with them. We've also downsized some events where they said the cost was a little burdensome. And we've also let them know upfront now that when they're bringing projects to the board, they should anticipate, you know, a budget for a groundbreaking or or look otherwise in their funding as they're planning their budgets. So it's really trying to forecast out now over the next year. I think the other thing is how these are calendared sometimes has been a point of frustration, even working with Gina about, well, if we plan it around your availability or Chris's availability, right? And not necessarily all the other commissioners are available, just having some awareness on kind of picking the date and then letting people know we will create the invite, we will handle this parts of it. So yeah, I would just say it was a desire to bring the board really clear roles and responsibilities for these events. So we meet or exceed your expectations, not undershoot.
Thank you.
One of the things that the board might want to consider on the topic of cost for these things. A lot of times the departments don't necessarily anticipate that they're planning for ribbon cuttings, and not every single project is going to have a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking. Is that something that you want to think about budgeting separately in the communications team budget this year, so they manage against it. Leaving the department's responsibility there. I just throw it out there for something to think about as we go into the budget season. On one hand, it could be easier for Pat to have X dollars that he's planning against, and you guys know what the budget is, and we figure out we're gonna do, 10 ribbon cuttings for $2,000 a piece. So it's one idea of separating out into a different line item for him to be able to manage against.
So how much does a typical event run? I mean, like, let's say the Euclid event. What, do you have a ballpark as to how much something like that would run, and just so that we've got a feel for it?
Well, Euclid, for the ribbon cutting, I also ended up renting heaters in the hope that it would beat back some of that cold. It's probably 2,500 to
I would say
3.
an average event is 2,500. A high event like the sheriff's office event with opening of the range, that might have
That
been,
was huge.
Yeah.
4,000 or 5,000.
That, yeah, that, I mean, that
That was
is,
closer to
that's
5.
unlike most of our ribbon, our ribbon cuttings.
Yeah,
That-
but
that-
your
that one was
your
huge.
average project activation event, getting the media there, bringing the community together, depending on weather and everything, was, yeah, it's probably closer to 2,500. 3. The Bear Lake
Big
one,
3.
that we cut and pulled back a lot of sales on that one. I think it was around 1,500 maybe.
Mhm.
So that was on the lower end of the spectrum. Not just trying to have a podium in a parking lot, but having the good visual there for the media, and then having it accessible too, because we had a number of guests who were coming
Who were physically challenged.
disabled.
So, and we will do that again for the ribbon cutting for Bear Lake next spring. We have that guest list, so we'll invite all of those folks again. Now for Bigelow Gulch, that's going to be big, it's going to be expensive. Weather is going to be a very important factor as to how many tents we need. Do we need space heaters? What is East Valley High School going to be able to do for us? Will they have the band there? Will they
I
have
thought we
the
decided we were gonna
cheerleaders?
do it indoors.
I think that's our backup, is to have a gym there, but we're talking late October.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can revisit that, but I
We
don't
decided.
With the room in the background.
to do it indoors.
Well,
That was a backup.
Was it backup?
Yeah.
I think the band and cheerleaders are important.
How much do we have to pay them?
Mm.
We don't
Hopefully
wanna
nothing.
mess with their, collegiate eligibility if we have to pay.
I think they'll be happy to come and celebrate with us, along with the
Yes.
Valley Chamber and all the freight mobility folks and the community members out there.
Yeah.
It's a big deal for the city of the Valley as well.
We'll have city officials, we'll have CRAB, we'll have Federal Highway, WashDOT, all these folks.
The funding partners are, I think, a really important piece, so
Yeah.
they can see what investments they've made.
So can we include the funding partners for all the phases as opposed to just the final phase? Cause I think, we had some TIP money down by the high school at the front of it, but I know TIP would be very excited to be able to see this one done and would be there at the end as well. But I don't know that we got any TIP money in the final phase. I know we got FEMCIB and we got CRAB, but I don't know that we got any TIP money, but they were also a player.
Commissioners, I can look that up, and it's
Put 'em on the
nothing
list.
to extend the invitation.
Yeah.
It's just very easy.
Yeah.
And we're probably gonna want, all the former county engineers that have been a part of this, I mean, that so many people that played a role in this.
I mean, this will go
20
way,
years.
way back to like Ross Kelly when he was the engineer.
Yeah.
Okay. Good suggestion, good call out.
Is the tent usually the most expensive thing?
It can be the sound system and the lights. The tents. It's how many you have
Yeah.
and,
Good size.
yeah. And we'll have a number of them for Bigelow. if we do this outside. But that also means we're going to have some lighting as well.
I'm trying to remember, I don't remember lights at many of our,
Mhm.
I mean, I know we always have speakers and the microphone, you know, the large speakers on each side of the stage and the microphone. Because I'm not
We've had
picturing
at least one
lights.
light at some of them, like for
Okay.
the sheriffs.
Ah.
Because it can get very dark
Under the tent.
under the canopies
Okay,
and,
We're also managing road noise there because it's
Yeah.
right next to nine
Yeah.
oh two
Yeah.
and. So there are some add-on costs, not that we're going overboard, but. You know, so that people can be heard and seen, and especially if we have TV media there, the lighting's important. So.
okay,
right, thank you very
it
much.
looks good to me, so. Right, any miscellaneous items?
For me.
Oh, see, Chris Anderson.
Yep, thank you. So I don't know if you all recall, last week you would have received an opinion from the hearing examiner in regards to a sewer bill appeal. And the hearing examiner has finished that. You know, I just wanted to touch on that today and see, you know, hopefully you've had a chance to review it. And if not, you know, we can move that up. So as far as moving forward on that matter, once the board has had a chance to review it, the next decision is whether or not you would like time to deliberate all together. That deliberation can be done in closed session. It's not actually going to be an executive session because quasi judicial matters are not covered under the OPMA. And so, but we would need to find a time to set that up for the board to have a discussion on that in a closed session, and then decide whether you want to adopt the hearing examiner's recommendation or make a decision in the other direction on that matter. So just bringing that up for awareness and attention, and knowing that Amber and Mary are not here today. And so, but wanted to put that on everybody's radar if you've not had a chance to review that opinion yet.
I don't think Amber is gonna be here tomorrow morning. I don't know about Mary, so we may have to kick this to the following week then.
And that's fine. We currently do not have a hard timeline on that as far as a legal or code-based timeline. I'm sure the appellant is eager to get a final decision, but aside from that, there's no specific deadline that the board has to meet.
Okay. Pat, do you have something on this?
One more miscellaneous item, because I know tomorrow's packed. Amy had asked us to bring up for Commissioner Waldriff a proclamation to recognize Chaz and Community Health Week, which is gonna be happening during the break, the board's break. So if we can get, if folks like that idea, we would prepare it and have it to vote for next week. So it'll be on next week's agenda, but that give us a week to work on the proclamation with Chaz.
I have something.
What, oh,
You good with that?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
All right, so it sounds like we got a majority. Okay, we'll get to work on it.
okay. All right, so yeah, Chris Anderson probably next week then. We can queue something up, Scott, make sure we have time on the agenda for that. Okay,
Sounds good.
all right. Okay, anything else?
We do have a handful of exec sessions, but I think it's probably best to wait till tomorrow afternoon when the full board is present for those. I know I've got two, and I think there's another one on the real estate acquisition as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then it is 11:01 and